Story 1. So I live in a small town, like really small, the kind of town where everyone knows everyone. In the main part of town where the schools and shops and restaurants are, there's a convenience store that's owned by this lovely Asian couple. Will be important later on that recently sold a lottery ticket that won $1 million. Because of this, a lot of people stopped buying their tickets at our local grocery store since there weren't a lot of people winning anything, and started going to that store instead, including my mom. I personally don't buy lottery tickets, mainly because I don't have money, but it also isn't something I personally find interesting. I bought one when I turned 18 just for the satisfaction of being able to, since I still can't drink or smoke for another year or so, not legally anyway, but that's about it. However, whenever my mom goes to the convenience store to buy her lottery tickets, I'll come with her because she'll buy me a bag of chips or Pop-Tarts or something because she's a great mom, and I'm continuing to be a leech for as long as I can until I go off to college. So it's a normal lottery day, dinner is done, and I'm already hearing the call of Pop-Tarty goodness from all the way in town, and we head out. We get there, get our stuff, and head to the counter. There's one guy ahead of us, so we keep ourselves 6 feet away and wait for him to finish up. Now this dude has 3 small boxes absolutely filled to the brim with lottery tickets. The kind where the person at the counter scans them, and 90% of the time you hear that annoying jingle that plays for way too long, followed by an automated winner coming from the machine, and it turns out to just be another free play or whatever it's called. My lottery knowledge is not exactly extensive, lol. So after we've been waiting for what feels like forever, and I've solved the venipede infestation in Pokemon Go, that the store had still have yet to be thanked for that BTW he's done with all of his lottery tickets, and I think all he got from all of them was like $40. I'm not sure, I just know it wasn't a lot. How did I know it wasn't a lot? Because this guy was enraged. Entitled Dad, what the heck? That's all I get. Lottery not always wins. Just have to play again. English isn't her first language, and normally I'd paraphrase, but I decided not to because of the disgusting ways he speaks to them regarding it. Entitled Dad, can you speak proper English? I spent my entire paycheck on these things. Me, that sounds like a you problem, bud. Entitled Dad, shut up. I'm sure you're wondering why my mom didn't step in to defend me here. She's on my side and would have backed me up if I needed it. But we sort of have a mutual understanding that we can handle ourselves. No yell in here, you have to leave. Entitled Dad, shut up, you witch. You're supposed to be good at math. More tickets equals more money. Me, I'm willing to bet you didn't do too well in math class. To me, well, at least now we know you aren't the worst mathematician in town. Though with a bet like that you'd probably win more money than he just did. It's at this point Mo comes out to handle things since he wouldn't leave. Entitled Dad, so does this one speak better English? He did, but he still has an accent. Mo, so what is the problem? Entitled Dad, talking like him, I tell you what is the problem. You stupid wife no give me enough money. Me dude, you bought a crapload of lottery tickets and didn't win. Just go home and scrounge for coins under your couch cushions, so you can pay your bills and move on with your undoubtedly sad life. Entitled Dad doesn't say anything. He just gets up in my face and starts breathing really heavily, like he's about to swing on me. I was already nervous because of the whole virus thing, and even though we both had masks on, getting close to a guy who certainly didn't seem to be doing too well hygienically didn't seem like the best type of social distancing. But he was a pretty big guy, and I'm a twig who spends his spare time on Reddit. I go for runs every morning, but that's it. I knew for sure I wasn't going to be able to take this guy in a fight. And even though my mom would have backed me up if it escalated that far, he probably still would have won. But the owner stepped in to help too. Mo, if you don't get out, I'm going to call the police. He left, but slowly, making really messed up comments and mocking him like, ooh, so scared, car da puris, and really horrible stuff like that. We all talked and laughed about it when he was gone and paid for our stuff, but they let me get an extra box of Pop-Tarts for the price of one. My mom's lottery tickets are the ones you scan online, And when we got home from the store, she scanned hers and won $20, which we both laughed hard about and confused the hell out of my brother and grandma. But that's about it. I'll update this post if I find out anything new. But I wouldn't be surprised if the guy got shunned by the rest of our town for the way he acted. It's happened before. But we're usually kind of a, if you apologize we'll let bygones be bygones town, which is to be expected. We're Canadian. Moral of this whole encounter: if you play the lottery, fine, that's your choice and nothing's wrong with that. But don't buy dozens of them. And don't get mad and/or racist if you don't make millions. Story 2. Now I don't know if the Karen of this story has woken up that morning on the wrong side of the bed, or she's always been a horrific human being, but what she did, it can't be forgiven. Period. It all started one morning when I decided to head to Walmart to buy a stroller for my baby, since the one we've had so far started to give us a hard time lately. We tried our best to fix whatever went wrong with it, but it was just too much to handle. And to be honest, it's understandable. It wasn't new. This stroller was in the family for so long, it was about time to give it a medal and let it enjoy retirement after so many years in service. Anyways, it was intended to be a quick purchase. Get in, grab a stroller, check out, hop into my car and drive back home to my sweet baby that was being watched at the time by his older sister until I got back with his new stroller. And that's exactly what I did. In less than 15 minutes, I was in and out with a brand new stroller I was pushing in front of me to my car parked in the store parking lot. So far so good, but it all started when I reached my car and found a woman blocking me in with her SUV, even though there were plenty of free spaces around for her to park in any of them. "Hi there, do you mind letting me out?" I ask her while pointing to my car. She gives me a condescending look, then looks back into her phone. "That's my car back there, and if you don't mind, I'd like to leave now," I politely told her. Didn't even look at me this time and completely ignored my existence. I have been suffering from anger issues for a long time, but the moment I knew I was pregnant for the first time, I started seeking help to get rid of it, or at the very least control it somehow. And thankfully, I got over that crisis by a huge margin, and so far I've had almost zero problems caused by that dark side of me. So knowing I shouldn't let anger get the best of me in that situation, I decided to stay as calm as I could be and try to resolve this issue without getting exposed to more provocation from that idiot woman. So I walked past her car and into the security guard booth in the parking lot and let the guy over there know what's been happening and that I would like him to come over and get this woman to move so I could leave and get back home to my children. He understood and walked back with me to where I was parking to try and resolve this situation. By this time I was still to this point, pushing the stroller I just bought right in front of me the whole time. I couldn't really reach my car to even put that thing in it. So yeah, I've been pushing it throughout the entire altercation. The security guard walks up to Karen in her car and tells her, "Hi ma'am, do you mind moving your car so this lady could get into hers over there and be on her way? It's illegal anyways to stop where you are, and now that it's even bothering other people on top of it, I have to ask you to move your car and let her out. And please, feel free to park wherever you'd like as long as it's in a properly dedicated parking spot." I don't know what triggered it, but all I know is that the ice-cold woman that was giving me zero attention earlier started boiling and turning red the moment the guard told her to move her car so I could get out with mine. She didn't say a single word to us, even though we could really feel the daggers she's staring at us at this point. Then she finally started properly reacting to our very reasonable polite request, or so we thought, and still without saying a thing, reversed her car a bit. It was still tight for me to get out, but I'll take it. I'll try my best. I started pushing my stroller towards my car, while the nice security guard sincerely offered to help me put my stroller into my car. And while we were having a small conversation whether to put it in the trunk or would it fit better on the back seat, Karen decided to let her demons take over and pushed her gas pedal and ran both of us over with her car. Neither of us lost consciousness, and thankfully the stroller softened the hit we both took a bit. Especially as I realized later that she hit the brakes the moment she made contact with both our bodies. The security guard had it worse than me, poor guy, but the worst part was that the stroller was crushed. Completely destroyed. Of course, I don't mean that a mere stroller is much more important to me than both my life and this poor guy's life. But the moment I realized that this woman had no freaking idea that this stroller was in fact empty, and that she probably did what she did thinking that my baby was inside that stroller, I saw red. Remember the anger issues that I mentioned above that I suffered from in the past? Yeah, in that exact moment, those past anger issues felt like a child's toy compared to the boiling emotions that engulfed me right then and there. And it was getting fueled by one solid question. What if my baby was actually in that stroller when that woman decided to run us over with her massive car? And once I realized the answer to that question, I snapped. I charged towards her car door. But before I could reach it, she seemed to be in the midst of opening it to check for the damages herself. But I didn't wait for her to get out of the car. I grabbed her hair and dragged her out, threw her on the ground, and started swinging like a mad person. I definitely wasn't in my right mind at that moment, and I feel like I snapped back to reality in the ambulance getting treated by the EMS right before I passed out completely. I woke up in the hospital the next day, with my husband and daughters right next to my bed. Then my husband filled me in regarding what happened, right after the doctors assured him that my condition was stable and that I was lucky to leave an accident like that with just bruises and minor cuts. After I started wailing on that woman in that parking lot, more security guards rushed to the scene and pulled me off of her until the cops and EMS arrived. All three of us left in ambulances, including the Karen that ran us over, because I may or may not have broken her nose and left her with more cuts on her face than I ended up having myself. After further investigation and the statements I and the injured security guard gave to the detectives and the CCTV footage that caught the whole thing that happened that day in the parking lot, Karen was charged with attempted murder and was sentenced to 15 years in prison. As for me, I'm back home and gladly surrounded by the people that love me. I may now need to resume my anger management sessions after all I went through and what I did to that woman, but I'm feeling positive that I will get over this as I did in the past. Thank you all for listening to my story. It was a pleasure of mine to share it with all of you. Edit. Normally you'd buy a stroller in a box and you'd assemble it yourself back home, but that was the last piece, the displayed one. It was already assembled and I decided to take it. Just needed to point that out since some people asked about why I was pushing it out of the store already. Story 3. I want to start off by saying that I work in a hospital, so due to this and HIPAA, I will be altering names of all the characters in our little play. With that being said, I happen to work security for a hospital in the town I live in. Let's call it Loserton, home of the Kenturtle Wild Canadians. I know, they are weird. We are contracted out by our employer to the local hospitals. Usually, we have 3 shifts, 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., 2 p.m. to 10 p.m., and my shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. the next day. During my shift, usually we have homeless individuals come in saying they are hurt, but in reality they just want some sleep in the rooms. This is actually all right, except because of COVID, the nursing staff is not having it. This is not as important because our main player, Karen the old hag, always comes in on the ambulance. Basically, whenever she comes in, she stays for about 3 hours, gets discharged, and then sits in the waiting room. We are always called to escort her off, and it always ends up with the cops being called on her. She always has the same excuse. I can't walk, I do not have kneecaps, you try walking without kneecaps. This goes on and on. To be fair to her, she does walk with a cane. However, we always remind her that she did just walk from her bed to the waiting room, and that the nursing staff was walking with you to make sure you do not fall. Whenever she feels like she is going to lose her battle, she will throw her cane at anyone close to her, and throw herself on the ground. Mind you, this lady is like 87 years old, and she acts more like a child than my 3-year-old niece. During the night, we had a hold for a patient that was prone to hurting themselves. We just sit outside the room to make sure they do not either hurt themselves or make a run for it. It's policy that involuntary holds cannot leave until our mental health finds them a bed anywhere. We always alternate every 2 hours to make sure none of us get burned out. Plus, we have these things called posts where we are supposed to be for 2 hours anyways. Karen came in on the ambulance as per her usual. Mind you, it is raining heavily, so when the ambulance picked her up, she was soaked from head to toe. According to the nurses, she was also very drunk. Karen plus alcohol equals disaster. Once she gets into her room, Glenda, the good nurse, might as well go all out here, walks in and gets vitals and asks what happened. The tech, Bob the builder, starts to get her the scrubs you get issued to change into. Karen throws a fit. She yells at the nurses because Bob the builder is male, and she claims that earlier that night she was assaulted, so she does not want any male persons near her. Understandable. They oblige. Only problem now is that she is falling back on her. I have no kneecaps, so she does not have to wear her scrubs. Great, let's just stay naked and let the entire see you, lady. Midway through the shift, our newer officer called over the radio for us to come into the for a disruptive patient. We had no idea that Karen was in the hospital until me and old guy walked back there. We walked to the monitor tech, who has been working in healthcare for like 60 years. Mrs. Nancy looks at us with the, "I'm gonna kill someone, y'all better stop me" look. Old guy says, "What is going on, Mrs. Nancy?" And then we heard it. "I am not putting on my clothes because I can't. I can't bend my knees." "Karen, you have to put your clothes on." "No, are you going to put it on me? I do not want you touching me." Old guy and I just looked at each other and rolled our eyes and sighed heavily. He went to talk to her, and I stayed outside the room providing cover. I talked to the nurses and found out what had happened. I thought nothing of it, so I waited until old guy was done talking to her. Once he was done, Mrs. Nancy wanted us to walk around the every 30 minutes or so. Shift is almost over, and it is now my turn to sit on the hold. I am about 3 beds down when she starts screaming and hollering once she gets the discharge paperwork. This is basically the stating, "We have done everything and diagnosed, and we recommend that you are stable enough to go home." Well, Karen was not having any of this. I get on the radio and call for the rest of the officers to come back to the They walk up to me, ask what is going on, and all I do is point to the room she is in and say, "Might need to handle that." Sure enough, she decided she was not leaving, and threw her cane at Glenda, the good nurse. Because this happened, policy dictates that when a patient strikes a staff member, local law enforcement is called. Not a minute goes by and 4 squad cars pull up, lights and sirens blaring. This was funny to me because they just casually walked in like, "Hey guys, I heard y'all needed us." Once they heard her screaming, Officer Bigby looks at the staff and just asks, "Is that the Karen?" "Yep." "You gotta be kidding me." He proceeds to rip open the curtain and, at the top of his lungs, "Karen, get out right now before you go to jail." Karen is not budging though. She argues back and forth with the officer about how she was assaulted, how she cannot walk, how she cannot bend her knees, how she cannot get her pants on. They even gave her the option to put the gown on. Officer Bigby nonchalantly states, "Karen, I saw you walking not 6 hours ago. Why are you like this?" "You are a freaking liar," Karen tells him. Fun fact, you can call cops a lot of different things. I know because I used to be a deputy in the other K-state. Pig, weirdo, bad C-word, coward, baby killer, we can take it in stride. But you do not call us liars and think you are about to win an argument. So you're telling me that my body camera, the dashcam, and the rear dash on my patrol vehicle are lying? No, that is not what I'm saying. I am saying you are a liar. She was told that she had been discharged, and if she refused to leave, she would be charged with trespassing and disorderly conduct. It took all of 30 seconds for all 4 officers to go into that room and handcuff her and place that gown on her body for transport. They threw all her belongings into bags, and she was escorted outside. Old guy came and relieved me from my post, and as I walked by the ambulance entrance doors, I could see the cops laughing and talking about their next post while she was in the back of the squad car with her head down, mouthing to herself. Honestly, as many times as we have to deal with her, it is nice when she leaves, it gets really silent at night. And that is the way we like it. They are now working on a warrant for repeated trespassing and harassment of hospital employees. Story 4. I live in Florida, and Hurricane Milton, which struck on October 9th, was devastating for my community. During the storm, a large tree from my neighbor's yard fell into mine, destroying a fence and landing on my pool enclosure. While the damage was substantial, it could have been worse. These things happen, and that's why insurance exists. I immediately submitted a claim. In the days following the hurricane, the community was without power, internet, and with very limited cellular coverage. Recovery efforts began swiftly, and on the second day, my neighbor came over to apologize for the fallen tree. They informed me that they had hired someone claiming to be a licensed and insured tree removal specialist. According to my neighbor, this individual planned to start removing the tree from my yard first and would meet with me the next day to discuss the work and provide a quote. I thought this was a good arrangement, as it saved me the trouble of finding someone myself. The following day, the tree removal specialist arrived, assessed the situation, and gave me a price. I told him I needed to confirm with my insurance company before he could start any work to ensure that his coverage was valid. He seemed unhappy with the delay, but said he would begin work on my neighbor's side of the tree in the meantime. Having grown up on a farm and having experience with chainsaws, I warned him that starting on the neighbor's side without proper stabilization was a risky move. He shrugged off my concerns, left my property, and handed me his business card, which claimed he was insured, honest, and creative, alongside a supposed license number. Later that afternoon, while my wife was outside cooking on a camp stove, we were still without power on day 3. The sound of chainsaws began. I immediately noticed that he was making a straight cut, which I knew was a bad idea given the precarious state of the tree. I called him, shouting that the pool enclosure was already beginning to buckle under the strain. He ignored my warnings and continued. I told my wife to go inside and began recording the situation on my phone. Moments later, as the tree trunk shifted, the part of the tree on my property catapulted upward, causing catastrophic damage. The pool enclosure collapsed almost entirely, the retaining wall cracked, the in-ground pool sustained severe structural damage, and even the roof of my home began to buckle. The total damages to my property were later estimated at over $300,000. Furious, I called him to both express my frustration and demand his insurance information. He assured me that he would email it immediately and that it was also available on his website. Given the limited internet connectivity, I asked him to use AirDrop to send it directly. Despite turning on my AirDrop and repeatedly refreshing it, I received nothing. I called, texted, and waited, only to eventually discover that he had blocked my number. That evening, when internet connectivity slightly improved, I investigated further and discovered that the website listed on his business card was inactive. Upon digging deeper, I found out that his business license had expired. He did not hold any professional credentials, and he likely had no insurance at all. To make matters worse, I uncovered that he had a criminal record, including an arrest in August 2012 for serious offenses involving endangerment and illegal substance use. Suing him seemed pointless. He clearly lacked the financial means to pay any judgment. Instead, I focused my efforts on ensuring no one else would fall victim to his services. I purchased the domain associated with his business name, his personal name, and even his parents' names. They are real estate agents. I built a website detailing the damage he caused, his lack of proper credentials, his criminal record, and my experience with him. All 15 domains I bought redirected to this site. To prevent him from simply starting a new business, I wrote a script to monitor state corporate registration listings. If he registered a new business or became an officer of any new entity, the script would automatically purchase domains associated with those names as well. In the 2 months since launching the site, over 700 locals have visited it. The website now ranks as the top search result on Google for his business name, his personal name, and his parents' names. His Facebook page has gone inactive, and his business phone line has been disconnected. Hopefully, this means he has transitioned to a different career path. As for legalities, I have been careful to ensure the content of my website strictly adheres to the truth and focuses only on what occurred. The domains are not for sale and serve as a cautionary resource for others in my community. Story 5. I've been doing all my shopping online, from groceries to clothes to everything, which means I usually get a lot of deliveries. I also buy a lot of stuff for my family to use, especially groceries and basic necessities. I started buying from more small local businesses, it being the pandemic and me wanting to help them more instead of big businesses like Amazon. This has meant having to deal with incredibly vague or straight-up wrong delivery information. I've worked at a small business before, so I expected these problems and don't mind it. A few weeks ago. Mom doesn't work anymore, sis is on term break, and I am working from home having a meeting. A delivery comes and no one answers the door. I have my headphones on so I can't hear the bell. The delivery man calls me and tells me he has been ringing the door and no one is answering, even though he can hear the TV. I apologize and run out to collect the parcel, seeing my mom in front of the telly with so much indifference. This made me mildly annoyed, and I asked her nicely to help open the door next time. Immediately she screams at me for assuming she has nothing to do, which sets off this shouting match between her and I. My sister comes out of her room, takes my mother's side and shouts at me for being rude, just for expecting my mother to answer the door. At this point I'm livid, and I ask if it's too much to expect my own family to help with these things, especially when I'm working. They both go on about how it's my personal responsibility to collect my own deliveries and that I should not take for granted that they'll help just because they're at home, and that I should tell them when I have deliveries coming. To which I try to explain about the often vague delivery estimates I get. This one in particular was supposed to come 2 days later. I point out to them that most of the deliveries that come for me end up being shared by the family, i.e., the groceries, coffee, necessities, etc., and that at the start of the year, before my mom quit her job, I was working from home alone collecting everyone's deliveries, even when no one tells me about any incoming ones. I singled out one day my sister had 4 deliveries, and I collected them all with no complaints. But obviously none of it gets through to them, and I give up the argument since I was outnumbered. Bring on the MC. I stopped ordering groceries for the whole family and food runs out. Both mom and sis just assume that I would order more, and when I don't they question me about it, and I tell them that it's their own personal responsibility to get their own groceries. A couple of deliveries came for my sister when she wasn't home, and I didn't bother receiving it because the personal responsibility was hers to collect. Plus, she didn't tell anyone about them. Turns out one of those deliveries was a laptop, and because no one answered the door, it was left outside and got stolen. My sister got rightfully angry at me and my mother, but I used their nonsense personal responsibility excuse back on her. Now no one is talking to each other, but I don't care. I feel like I've willingly and readily helped them, but when I ask for help in return, it's way too much for them to do so. This might be petty AF, but screw it. It's the card they chose to play. Edit. Thank you all for the words of support. I didn't expect this to blow up the way it did. Wow. And thank you for the awards too. I'll answer some common questions with this edit. Over here, couriers give you the option to allow them to leave the package at your door. It is an explicit opt-in you must do, and I guess my sister chose that for her laptop. Jokes on her for choosing that for such an expensive item. She made a police report about it, but the courier won't do anything because she gave them explicit permission to leave it at the door. They have photo and video proof of delivery that they even provided. My mom isn't old, has hearing loss. If she was, I wouldn't expect her to be receiving deliveries. We don't live in a dangerous area. Not opening doors is actually uncommon here. My mom, however, expects everyone else to do it for some reason. Moving out and being in a toxic environment. I used to think a lot of this was in my head, and that I was just letting it all get to me. Thank you all for helping me see that it wasn't, and that my family has been emotionally abusive. It took a lot for me to draw that line, but I guess something snapped in me and gave me the courage. I'm actively looking for a place, and my best friend deals with property. She's helping me keep an eye out for good places to move to. Unfortunately, because of COVID, the rental market has become a shitshow with landlords taking advantage of foreigners stuck here. Story 6. I used to work as a photojournalist for a local newspaper. I used to do a bit of everything. There were days that almost all the newspaper was filled with pics I took. The work shift in the newspaper was kinda taxing, as sometimes the work shift went from 8 up to 12 hours a day depending of the news and things happening in town. After 2 years here and there, I was assigned to the sports section. Not a big fan of sports myself since I'm more of a computer geek. If it wasn't an e-sport, I wasn't interested. But sports schedule was a bit over the top. There were times when there was pro baseball, basketball, and even soccer in the city I was working at. That without even counting the school sports events. It was tiring as hell. We were 2 photographers working in the section, but since the other guy was a little old, the editor was more lenient with him. A year into the section, and I was busted. I really mean it. Super tired as hell. My wife was annoyed since I was leaving to work at 6 a.m., and sometimes back till 10 p.m. and at times even later than that. On the weekends, if there were too many events, I surely was working. There was a season when I worked almost 2 months non-stop. I mean, it was all voluntary, and I was paid a lot for it. I mean, monthly I was cashing 7 or 8 minimum wages, hence, I was always available for them. My editor was an old-school journalist that had been working in the newspaper since day one. We used to joke that the building was built around him and shit like that. He is a total grouch, but sometimes can joke around and makes people forget he's got a temper. On baseball season, I was really tired after almost 2 months working non-stop. There was a baseball game gonna be held on Saturday afternoon. My editor called me to his office to tell me that he needed me on Saturday. Since I was totally busted, but could really use the overtime, I told him, sure, but for the game, I'll even be on the stadium, and when the game ends I'll drive to the newspaper, deliver the material and go home. My boss wasn't happy with that. He wanted me all day from 7 a.m. up until closing since he had other events. I said no, and told him he should call the other guys since it was my weekend off, and I really needed rest. Needless to say, he wasn't very happy with that. Afterwards, he was really rude with me on almost every occasion available, and if I did something wrong, he would scold me like if I were his son. Since sports is a sections that was an awkward schedule, I had some liberties with the check-in time, and at times I was up to half-hour late. One day I checked in late only to find him right at the entrance waiting for me. He was super pissed. He scolded me for over an hour, and after he was done, he wrote me up with HR. The memo from HR specified that the work shift was 8 hours, and that I was to work from 7 a.m. until 5:30 p.m., no more no less. Enter malicious compliance. From that day on, I was at 7 a.m. sharp, not a minute earlier, not a minute later. Sometimes I would arrive early but waited by the clock until it was 7 a.m. to punch in, and at 5:30 p.m. I was out the door. It was already a week abiding by the rules when the editor came to me at 5:25 p.m. He told me that there was this university basketball game. Apparently they rescheduled and wanted the newspaper to cover it. The editor said sure, and he wanted me to go. I just stated at him, I would really love to go, but as I recall in the memo, HR made me sign that my work shift is from 7 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. And since it's 5:30 p.m., I'll be seeing you tomorrow. The color from my editor's face went from white to angry red. His voice went a bit higher while he said, if you go, I'll be writing you up in HR. With a devilish grin, I just told him, extra hours are voluntary, and I don't want to do M, and left. Next day, I came in 7 a.m. sharp like a good boy, and I sat in my spot. My boss came with a somber face and told me in the most fake sheepish voice he could muster, okay, I guess there was a bit of misunderstanding with your work hours. Since you work a bit overtime when required, the management said your work shift is a bit more flexible, and you could be a bit later from time to time. I just smiled and said thanks. After that, I went back to work, but not full throttle like before, as I was giving my family a bit more time, and whenever the editor needed some extra hours, he would ask the nicest possible way. Some companies like to go by the rules, but when it doesn't favor them, the same rules go out the window.